Hi, I'm Lara Bullock. I'm the curator of Fear No Art, Civic Engagement, Histories, Currencies, and today I'm here with Cat Chiu Phillips, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her work in the show called Entertain. Cat was born in Manila and throughout her life has moved several times. She's lived in Canada, in Toronto, and went to school at the San Francisco Art Institute, and currently lives and works in San Diego. And her art is represented in collections such as the Riverside Art Museum, the city of Pasadena, among many other places. So I'm honored to have her as a part of this show today. Cat's work is really unique. On first glance, kind of looks like a tapestry. You can kind of see that it's woven, but it's really the materiality of the works that are really interesting and different. She uses kind of outmoded technology, in this case cassette tapes, to create this work. But in general, when I was asked to curate this show and wanted to work with the city's civic art collection, I noticed that it was pretty limited in terms of the mediums of work that were included in it. A lot of paintings, a lot of sculpture, and not really a lot of fiber art or anything kind of outside of painting and sculpture. We did have a few pieces, such as the Jacqueline Hughes Muni piece behind me, which is a quilt, but no one that was really kind of approaching art making in this way. So Cat, maybe to get started, you could tell us a little bit about how you started working with these materials and kind of drawn to this mode of creating.
I think that's interesting that you actually mentioned that the collection doesn't have a kind of a pure representative of the different art mediums, and the Mooney piece, which is a quilt, I think it's just really interesting because maybe some people may consider it as a lowbrow art, and this very domestic piece, it's handcrafted, it's traditional, and maybe you might not traditionally see that in the gallery museum format. So, and with that in mind, I feel like how I came about to creating this piece was just that just being in my childhood, like the process of art making, actually, when I was in Manila, that's what I spent my childhood, instead of like, video games and so forth. It was a lot of crocheting, embroidery, and just all these very traditional handicraft forms. So I think that's where, now that moving forward and like conceptually, like how do I want to envision my work, I feel like I had to go back to my childhood of that, like art making process, so it just gives me not only nostalgia, but also just going back to that moment in my childhood. It's almost like Zen-like, meditative, and so forth. Okay. So, and like I said, you might think, not you, but people in general might think it's like a very domestic, like, crafty method, but I feel like it's another visual language, definitely, in this setting. For sure. So,
did you learn how to crochet and maybe weave? I don't have the proper terminology, maybe you can clarify, but did you learn that from your family, from
Oh yeah, definitely.
Your family? Okay.
My aunt, she was the one who taught me.
Okay.
So we would have these like rolling brownouts, or in Philippines, and there would be like a rain and like typhoon outside, and you're stuck in there. And I think that's how it all started. Just like I started like the cross stitch, actually, and then embroidery, and then it went to crochet. So, and it was just like, that was my training. It was from a family member. So my aunt would make all these doilies for our home. So our house would have all these doilies everywhere, And I remember she would do like the pineapple format in like these doilies. So I think just now, like as an artist now, and like I said, I just feel like this is my comfort zone. Yeah. It's comfortable. It's helpful for me as a mom myself. And like people, like I said, might think it's a very domestic process,
Yeah.
But you have to go beyond that. Conceptually, like what do you have?
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, I think that's right on. I think that is kind of one of the first things that people think of when they see weaving or handicraft, maybe to call it. But so in these works, you're taking something that, and usually handicraft, if we're equating it with like the female gender, then we think of like warmth and community and family, which are kind of retained in those mediums. But what's interesting with your work is you're taking technology, which a lot of times is perceived colder, I don't know if we would go as far as saying it's gendered masculine, but maybe in some realms. But so you're kind of taking this really kind of impersonal medium that, is kind of just the kind of the mode of maybe giving music to the world, or the mode of showing home videos, or it has that same kind of sentimental and familiar aspect, but kind of at the far end. So you're like taking the actual kind of cold material and then making it kind of into this piece that is a little bit softer, but it sort of resists either, it kind of just exists kind of in between. It kind of makes you question and ask questions.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of dualities with, so this handcrafted, process versus like this, technology, like this item of like, even though it's now, not a lot of people are using it. So there's definitely like a lot of dualities. I feel like that's the playfulness, the whimsy of it. I feel like that's part of my personality as well.
Yeah.
And coming to the material itself, I've always been interested in the transformation and like the conversion of a material. So, and growing up in Manila with pollution, overpopulation, and so forth, I feel like that was really important to me. Like, how do you, the transformative aspect of something, right? Like, how do you, how do I communicate that in my own work? So maybe that's why I started using all these like very non-traditional items, right? I started, I have to go back maybe several years ago, and what I would do is I would take all these knockoff like bags.
Okay.
So I would take, so like I had this idea of like, well, what would happen if like I would have all these knockoff bags, like designer high-end bags, and then convert them to a quilt, which I did like a series of that work. It's a lot of conversation also with like the post-consumer item, like what happens when people don't want it anymore. And like I said, it's like going back to just this idea of consumerism, like in being born in Manila. So when I was doing that process, I came to a point that I said, well, I'm being part of this, I'm being a consumer, like I'm getting all these items, even though they may be used or like from Craigslist or so forth, and then converting them, but I'm also being part of like this kind of almost perverse process of that. So, and that's when I started just really looking into discarded items, like what people would consider trash. So it started with plastic, and then came about with like the technology. And actually that came about because I did a residency in an e-waste. It's a ecology center, but they actually recycle all these like outdated pieces of technology. So the crazy thing is they don't recycle these. People donate cassette tapes and VHS tapes. They just kind of like throw it in the landfill. So that's what I found out when I got there.
Okay.
So that's when brains turning and saying, hey, I should do something with this. So it's kind of combining, like I said, that very traditional method of art making, and then like using this like outdated technology, and there's this kind of connection with that. So it's a relationship that actually is, to me, is interesting. It's just this conceptually, it's interesting. So.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you said that they don't recycle the tapes. Like, who knew? But that's kind of one of the things I think is really interesting about your other work behind us with the actual tapes, and it kind of memorializes, you know, not just the technology itself, but it kind of tells a story of kind of people's lives. It's like old photographs almost, with their handwriting, labeling, their homemade tapes, which is also a form of sort of repurposing technology in a way.
The remix.
Yeah. and then just kind of like the funny kind of collection that you've amassed with like the Christmas tape or the, you know, musician or, you know, George Michael, I don't know. So just kind of memorializing, like really kind of freezing in time, you know.
Yeah, it also, when I started this, when I really got involved with crocheting the cassette tapes and the VHS tapes, it's interesting how now that people knew, so people were donating their materials to me, and just seeing like, oh, this is interesting. They made this mixtape for, you know, it's just like, why would you do a mixtape on, I don't know, like.
Yeah, whatever it is.
It's
very random. Yeah.
Very random. But
for sure.
Now that I have all these tapes, it's just nice to see all that, right? I mean, nowadays it's the convenience and the accessibility of all these the mediums, you know, and you don't have a tangible, like, physical object in front of you.
Right.
So, but this is just like it's the old times.
Yeah.
We have, like, an object to represent that past, you know, and the time when I made this mixtape for my loved one, you know, and so, but we don't, I don't feel like we have that now. So I feel like definitely the pieces are nostalgic, and the pieces are almost archival of the material, you know, these obsolete items.
Right.
So it's
and the irony of just using a medium that's so obsessed with the new, like constantly being
what's
new.
Next?
Yeah.
What's next? My phone? No. You don't need a new phone.
Yeah. So, next? Who knows? Your next medium.
But I think that all really drives kind of the work that I do. Just you know, so not only the playfulness, but also just the nostalgia. Like the handmade, I feel like that's the resurgence of the handmade is prevalent now, you know. I mean, you know, with the use of technology and like the work that we see in the contemporary art world, I feel like there's a huge resurgence in like the extension of your hand.
Right.
So, and I think that's very important, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of like these very traditional methods, like we don't want to lose that. So because we can digitally create something doesn't mean we, you know, that we have to lose this too. So just going back to the traditional methods, and how does that actually look like in our contemporary, you know, art world? So.
Right, definitely. You mentioned initially when you were sort of learning these techniques, you did it with family. So I was wondering, you know, today, now that you're not, you know, a kid in Manila learning, and you're making these in your studio, what is the process like? Is there kind of a similarity? Does it kind of transport you to like a time, or, and just how much space do you need to create a work like this?
I believe that the beauty of this is that traditionally it was in a domestic setting, so that means that I can actually create these in my domestic setting. As a mom, as a wife, and just, you know, I could still be around my family and actually be involved with my passion. So I do create these on my own, like the crocheting and just still being involved and with my family and just, you know, still working at the same time. I think it really helps me. So, and then regarding this piece, I think that if you look right here on the bottom, actually, you could see like the little volume, kind of these volume bars. That's how this particular piece actually started. Like how, if you can envision music, which of course the visualization of music is, you know, it's of interest to a lot of people. I feel like that was, to me, You know, like how do I visualize music? Like if these cassette tapes, if you can hear these cassette tapes, and I can't tell you how many cassette tapes I use for this. It's almost like, you know, how would that look like visually? So, and that's how this was inspired with that. So you can even see like the change of like the cassette tapes, the tone, the color, and then on the bottom you could see almost like these music bars, and then all of a sudden it's kind of these bursts of music just collecting together. So
it's kind of like a score.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how this idea started for this particular piece, actually. And but also just that, once again, like going back to like the nostalgia of like a, you know, a tapestry like on the wall, you know, so playing around with that idea as well. So.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. So we started this conversation mentioning how the Civic Art Collection was lacking in terms of diversity of artwork, but I'm happy to announce that Cat Chiu Phillips recently had a work acquisitioned into the city's collection. Yay! So that is changing. With that, Kat, would you like to share kind of anything that you're working on currently, and then also just how people can get in touch with you and find out more about your work?
I currently will be installing a piece next month, actually, for the city of Palm Desert. So I'm working on this wonderful kite sculpture for them. And also for the next year, upcoming year, still waiting on the airport. So we have a piece for like the San Diego airport that's been on hold because of COVID. So I've been also waiting on that one, and some installation work for the City of Encinitas Public Library.
And what about, do you have a website or Instagram account that you would want to share?
Yes, you can contact me on Instagram. It's my name, it's Cat Chiu Phillips. That's my handle, and also my website's my name as well. It's www.CATCHIUPHILLIPS.com. And yeah, feel free to hit me up anytime.
Thank you so much. So Kat, can you tell us a little bit about your favorite work in the show?
Well, this one definitely, when you walk into the show, it's just in the middle of the gallery and just pointing at you. It's really calling you out. There's a great emphasis on this. So this is a piece from Collective Magpie. And I think this is an ongoing question that we have, that it's prevalent, it's now, you know, it's a significant question. So, you know, who designs your race, you know, and as an American, and we're supposed to be like this melting pot culture, is it necessary to really define your race in this? We're all Americans, is it? So it questions that, like, normalcy, like this, you know, viewed normalcy in our, socially in our world. So
I take it for granted.
Yeah. So, I mean, and like I said, I think that this overall, just in our society now, it definitely speaks to me, because the idea of race, especially in a multicultural environment, multicultural country, is it necessary to identify yourself in this race when we're all Americans? So I feel like this really, this piece speaks to me. So.